Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. In this video, we're gonna talk about the argument. What is the argument? And what are the modes of argumentation? First of all, let's talk about the structure of the argument. What is the argument all about? Actually, the argument is derived from the verb to argue. And when I say that someone argues, it means that he or she gives an opinion. And when I ask this person on what basis you gave your opinion, he or she will tell me facts or premises or evidence on which they based their opinion. That's what is the argument. So the argument is an opinion. We can call this opinion a conclusion. We can call this opinion judgment. Call it whatever you want to call it. So keep the meaning of an opinion or a conclusion or a judgment or a claim. Sometimes they call it a position. This is the final part of the argument, or the core of the argument, or the point of the argument. But this opinion should be based on or predicated on facts or evidence or information or data, based on which we reach the position or the conclusion or the judgment. That is, as a whole, we call this an argument. So we can say that there is difference between to argue and to dispute, because when you argue, you give an opinion based on facts or information or data. But when you dispute, the dispute is all about someone giving an argument and maybe someone else disagrees with this or with that argument, giving an opposite opinion. That is dispute. But our focus is on argument. If we want to reach a conclusion or to hold an opinion based on premises or facts, we can do this in different modes. The first mode is to do this deductively, in a deductive way. And this deductive argumentation goes back to Aristotle. If you know Aristotle was Plato's student. And if you want to know about Plato was Socrates' student. So Socrates was the teacher or the master of Plato, then Plato was the teacher or master of Aristotle. Aristotle expresses the argumentation in the mood of deductive argumentation with the famous example when he said, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Again, he said all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. In this structure, Aristotle deductively reaches the conclusion from premises. The first premise was too general. All men are mortal. That was too general premise. Then he went specific and said the second premise, which is Socrates is a man. So that was a second premise. That's more specific than the first premise. And then he got down to the conclusion, very specific conclusion: Socrates is moral. So in this pattern of logic or reasoning, the conclusion is 100% certain. This is an absolute certain conclusion, drawn from general premise, very general premise: all men are moral. And another less general premise: Socrates is a man. So that is less general premise. And the conclusion was so certain. The conclusion is absolutely certain when the two premises are true. If we consider the two premises are true, in this mode of argumentation, we reach to absolutely certain conclusion. That is, as I said, that is the way of Aristotle's argumentation. And if you remember René Descartes, the French philosopher, who said the famous logical statement, cogito ergo sum, cogito ergo sum. By this statement, René Descartes emphasized the way of Aristotle, Aristotle's way of reaching the truth. Cogito ergo sum, which can be translated to I think, therefore I exist. That was a deductive statement. That was deductive reasoning, because he said cogito ergo sum, translated to I think, therefore I exist. So the first, we can interpret this into deductive way by saying all what things exist. All what things exist. All what things exist. That's a general premise. Okay. René Descartes thinks. René Descartes thinks when he said I think. Thinks. Therefore, René Descartes exists. By the way, this kind of reasoning or logic is called top-down logic. Top-down logic, because we start with the general premise, then we go down to a less general premise, then we reach an absolute conclusion. That's why we call it top, like a funnel. It's like a funnel. Okay, the water goes from the wide part of the funnel, then we reach the conclusion at the specific or the narrow part of the funnel. So that's like a funnel. That's why we call it top-down logic. Top-down logic. In the 17th century, Sir Francis Bacon, the famous English philosopher, tried to challenge the Aristotelian logic by expressing the way to reach the truth or to reach a conclusion in an inductive way rather than deductive way. And in his book, published in 1620, he said that in order to reach a conclusion, we have to base this on repeated observation, specific instances. And by depending on these specific instances and the repetition among them, we can reach a conclusion. Actually, this conclusion is probabilistic. And because this conclusion in this way will be probable, So there will be assumptions that we will talk later in the next video about this kind of argumentation with the assumptions connecting the premises to reach a conclusion. That's why we call this kind of logic bottom-up logic, because we move from very specific observations, very specific data, very specific information, very specific premises in order to reach a conclusion, which is at this moment will be, as you know now, will be probable. So the aim of this way of argumentation is to reach a probabilistic conclusion. That's not certain conclusion, but it is probable conclusion. And it is, as long as the number of premises or repeated observation is high, so the level of certainty of our conclusion will be high. So the more premises or the more repeated observation we have, the higher the certainty of our conclusion. Okay. And in that way, Francis Bacon, in his book Novum Organum, tried to put the basics for scientific argumentation. Also, this gave rise to the concept of empiricism. And empiricism is all about the belief that in order to reach the truth about a certain phenomenon, we have to repeatedly observe something or observe premises or instances and depend on practical experience and experiments. A simple example that can show the difference between the two modes of argumentation is when I tell you that Ahmed eats a chocolate when he studies. Then I tell you that Ahmed will study on Monday. Therefore, Ahmed will be eating chocolate when he studies on Monday. That is what we call the deductive way to reach a conclusion from premises, to reach a specific conclusion from general premises. On the other hand, if I tell you that Ahmed eats a chocolate when he studied on Thursday, then on Friday, Ahmed ate chocolate when he studied on Friday. Then on Saturday, Ahmed ate chocolate when he studied on Saturday. Then on Sunday, Ahmed ate chocolate when he studied on Sunday. So the general conclusion that you can reach from these specific instances is that Ahmed eats chocolate when he studies. So as long as there is a repeated observation, we can reach a general conclusion. That's the way the inductive logic works. Repeated observation, we reach a conclusion, but at that moment, this conclusion is not absolutely certain, but this conclusion is probable, and it will be highly probable as long as the observation are repeated for so many times. Okay, that's why we call this inductive way of argumentation.